Hey guys, it's Ivan. How you doing? I watched Eloy's video this morning with his cool shades as he was driving to work, talking about the kind of the logistics of the supporting characters, the secondary characters in Star Trek Adventures, and asking some questions about it. I think specifically because you're limited in the number of supporting characters you can kind of invoke in a session, and that's based upon the ship size. And as he mentioned, I believe this is a much bigger topic than just Star Trek, which is why it has me a little bit interested. I was thinking about like how we handle supporting characters or extras or all the other people in gameplay. Now we all are familiar with the very traditional. Okay, well, the game master controls everybody else except the player's characters, and you have your main character. And there's other games like we've discussed already that have some kind of troop. And it could be something, where it's very canon, like Ars Magica, or, things like Anthony was talking about in his World of Darkness campaigns, where they had werewolf characters, and they had vampire characters, and they had mortal characters, etc. And so, depending on what the game was, you chose that character, having a stable or troop of characters. But as he mentioned, this is different. We're talking about players controlling or having some kind of control over, or naming whatever it is, the supporting cast. Their friends, the good guys, for the most part, the allies. And it's interesting how Star Trek handles this, and I believe, that probably, from everything else I've seen from Star Trek Adventures, it's done in this way, where it kind of utilizes the main mechanic and says, okay, well, the ship size is 5, so that means you can invoke 5 secondary characters. I think it's an attempt by that game to just kind of try to keep everything as unified as possible, and so that you don't have to learn a whole bunch of different things. And it kind of makes sense, but I had to back up and think about this as Eloy was talking. Like, when you invoke somebody being there, and Star Trek, of course, is the perfect example because it's this big, giant starship. The genre is not 4 or 5 people going out on an adventure. It's for the most part, a crew of officers with an entire retinue of other people that are on this starship. So, from a standpoint of the fiction, yes, somebody is supposed to be there. It would be insane for the 5 of them to be walking around that starship by themselves. And at some point, in any given scene, I think this probably falls outside. And I'm looking again at the actual supporting characters' rules, at least part of them in the book. The ones I could find today, where it talks about the idea that they're there, to do things like making sure that everything gets manned. On the bridge, that sort of thing, because there might not be enough player characters. But, at least from what I've done in other games, there seems to be that point where you kind of say, of course, the transporter, the person manning the transporter ought to have a name. And so you just name them. And then maybe later on they show up and become a real recurring character. And we've done that in other games for years. You simply, either the GM names them or they say, okay, well, who is this barmaid or whatever. I don't know why it's always a barmaid, but go with this example, would you? But I think probably what the other reason that Star Trek Adventures has some kind of real codified set of rules around these supporting characters is because they are, in a very real way, an extension of your character. The characters in Star Trek Adventures, the player characters, are assumed to be officers, and as such, they are tasked with telling other people what to do. My chief engineer is supposedly has this big supply of engineers working for him. The captain can, of course, tell anybody to do anything, etc. The doctor, I'm sure, has other people doing stuff for him. But any of us can say, hey, crewman X, go do this, because our rank allows us to do that. So in a very real sense, the entire crew of the ship becomes an extension of our character. And if there's not some kind of rein put on that, I expect all of us, or I can't imagine that the people involved in this particular game wouldn't be mature. I think we're all going to be mature with how we use it. But I think it gives some guidance in terms of how much can the player characters use to actually affect the world around them, which is not all that different than how a game like Ubiquity handles it. Like when you have a resource, if you put experience into that resource, now you can actually use it to change the world. Before it's just kind of this incidental. I think of these various crewmen in Star Trek Adventures being kind of like window dressing and background and they come to life. We invoke them and actually use them to solve our problems, the problems of the moment, by giving them names. Now, they already exist. And here's one of the other interesting things I was thinking about, and I smiled because it reminded me of what Ubiquity does. Jeff Combos came up with this really great system in Ubiquity where you can zoom way in or zoom way out. And Wiggy from AAA, really put some great finishing touches on a lot of that in a lot of the AAA's, not only the AAA's core books, but in all the various supplements, all the neat little guides to whatever. But the point is, in Star Trek, the ship has statistics, and it has two sets of statistics, just like a person does, because once again, unified mechanic, so it's easy to learn. But when you're having like the ship aid you, there's a certain part of that it's clear is the physical structure of the ship, like how well is this thing made. But there's the other part of it, which represents the crew, and how many people do you have, how big is your crew, and then how well trained, how well disciplined are they, etc. So with your engineering score or whatever, this represents, it's not the ship helping you, it's people. But you're zooming way out, in that particular case. They are kind of almost the nameless, faceless crowd of Starfleet crew people, which then we can zoom right in. And here's the other thing that's really interesting about, what they did with supporting characters that I really like, is you can use these people, once we've named them, once we've created them, once we've created, Ensign Saparagus or Saparagosi or whatever his name is going to be, of engineering. I initially created them simply because we needed somebody. It made sense that there should be somebody in engineering that was going to help me with my task. And it was very simple, helping Chief Engineer Asimov with his task. At that point, though, what he was, how he existed in that particular scene was a non-controlled supporting character. He was somebody, we named and invoked and used in a scene for a minute. And, if you go back and read the book, which is really interesting, they don't get all of the actions that a controlled character is. Now, were we in a different instance with this particular character? Like, let's say we beam down to the planet on our away mission, or fly the shuttle, because we don't like to beam down in this game because we're scared. When we fly down in the shuttle, I could have decided that Chief Engineer Asimov stayed on board, which I probably should have, But then I could have said, hey, you know what? I'm going to take Ensign Saparagus down to the planet. At this point, he would now be a supporting character under complete control, and as such, he would become much more real. Now, he wouldn't get his stats and his values and his motivations and his talents all beefed up until we've used him over and over and over again, as per the rules. However, he would have all of the actions and what else? What do you call it? Minor actions and tasks and combat actions or scene actions that a regular fleshed out character would have, because he was now under control. I wasn't controlling anybody else but him. That's really kind of interesting and harkens back to a lot of stuff we kind of used to do in old school. Where I talked about before, where you'd have your main character and you've have your henchmen with you. But it was usually up to something like GM Fiat, where you could say, okay, well, I'm going to have my lackey Carl go do this, and it was up to the GM, like how effective that retainer might be and how much of a background person he might be in a given scene. What Star Trek Adventures has done is kind of codified this, and it gives you this option. Do you want to play that lackey, that secondary character in the scene, front and center, and you're not going to control another character? Which once again, it's the Star Trek genre that really, I believe, brings this to the forefront, where it makes a lot more sense that all of the officers aren't going to be joined at the hip, going from point A to point B all the time, because that would be ridiculous. That wouldn't jive with the fiction that is Star Trek. They send people. So yeah, you have Saparagus going down to the planet's surface, which now, he's a more fully inhabited, fleshed out minor character. In something like Ubiquity, we've had those scenes where we've played the lackeys where the main characters weren't present. There's no real mechanical difference in Ubiquity for what the lackey can do when he is the only person being controlled by a player and when he's being controlled by the GM. What Star Trek has done to make it, I think, even more granular is there's a little bit more control, or a little bit more like, well, how much can they do? They're a little more effective. We've zoomed out just a little bit when they're a non-controlled supporting character, but we can zoom in a little bit more when they are being controlled. Not all that different Now that I'm bouncing around from game to game, but I've been looking at these games and thinking about how they relate to the other ones that I've learned and know. Something like Star Wars, where you can choose the level of your adversary, so to speak. The game master can make somebody an adversary or a nemesis, and they become much more real. Their stats are much more in line with what a regular player characters might be. They have more mojo, or they could simply be a minion, where they still operate with the same rules. The core mechanic hasn't changed, but there's just less steps. They're easier to knock out. Once again reminds me of another game, Ubiquity. Really cool. When you think of something like our all-for-one regime Diabolique. Often we've gotten into swordplay with people that really just aren't that important, and the game offers you some great options in terms of like, what are they really doing there in the fiction? Why are these thugs there in this particular scene? Are they named Cardinals guards that are there to give us a real run for our money? In which case, they pretty much have the same stats that we do. They are equal to player characters. Or are we going to use the blade fodder rules in All for One, where pretty much what happens is if you score a hit on one of these guys, they go down. Doesn't say that they're dead or anything like that, but you've incapacitated them. They're less important in the scene. Or there's another little supplement he put out. It's a little miniature thing that goes into, I think, Richelou's Guide 2 or 3. It's called Serious Situations, which I really love, which handles a lot of different tasks in that can come up in the game. But one of the things it does is you can end up tangling with a group of thugs, a group of essentially minions, where you roll the dice, and if they score more successes than you do, that's how much damage you take. Could be 4, 5, 6 guys, attacking you. But if you score more successes than they do, that's how many of them you simply take out. Once again, doesn't say you killed them, but you've incapacitated them. The game has zoomed out even farther on those particular people. Why are they there? Why are we using them? Now, that, of course, is a GM-controlled character. Those are NPCs, but it's kind of an interesting analog to what Star Trek Adventures is doing with those minor characters, those secondary characters. So I think, getting back to the original point, the original questions that I was asking way back when in the Stone Age, I think, we can probably approach this, with the from intent. Why are we actually using this person? Are we using them to solve our problems? Are we using them as a replacement character? Asimov isn't going down to the planet's surface. We're going to send somebody. We could send a red shirt. We could send Saparagosi. We could send whomever. Then we're fleshing out and reusing this secondary character and giving him all the benefits of a regular character. Are we simply having Saparagosi in the scene to aid something? Maybe he beams down to the planet's surface with us, but he's not really being controlled by anybody. Or he's like that red shirt who may or may not end up being named Jose, maybe Josie Wales, whatever his name's going to be, where he's down the planet's surface, but he's not actually controlled by any of us. He has less rights at that particular point. He can be taken out easier. Or are we just going to have one of those scenes where, either one of those guys is just part of the ship, and when we do some kind of task and get an assist from the assist from the ship, and maybe it's an engineering task, maybe it's just Saparagosi is figured into that engineering score of the ship, and that's all. Or his friends, the other people in the engineering department, or and I'm not sure how much the game itself supports this. Just that idea that okay, well, there's somebody manning the transporters. It's not necessarily going to be the captain's role to transport us up, and it's probably a difficulty 0 task unless there's something amiss, and we can have Ensign Abigail Ybarra actually just beam us up, and we just given her a name. But other than that, we haven't really invoked the mechanic yet. I think it's a matter of intent, but it reminds me of all the kind of stuff we used to do with old school games. I think of all the times. I think the difference is this uses a unified mechanic. It's a little bit easier. Ubiquity, Star Wars, Star Trek Adventures. The mechanic touches the character in a different way, or we use it in a slightly different way, or the numbers mean a little bit different. They become more or less powerful over this person, if you will. Whereas in something like old school, we might end up. I have a supplement somewhere at home where you roll a d6, and it's like opposed d6 rolls, and that's how much my not sure if that ended my transcript right there, but if it did, that call messed that up. I just say you roll a d6, you have some kind of opposed d6 roll, and you find out how many characters died, all that kind of stuff. Not that different from the old fighter rules where you roll a d6 or d8 or whatever. That's how many mooks you killed, when you're higher level. So, yeah. hopefully this makes a little bit of sense. But that's one of the things I was thinking about. It's really, really fascinating, and I think we just need to approach these things from the fiction. Why are they there in the first place? I don't know. What do you think?